The night was quiet at Sunny Smiles Petting Zoo, which was ironic because nothing about this place was particularly sunny, and the only smiles came from visitors who laughed at how run down it was. The zoo was the kind of place that smelled permanently of hay, regret, and questionable decisions. Maurice, the most miserable donkey alive, stood in his small pen, glaring at the world with the level of disdain usually reserved for tax audits. His usual evening routine involved staring at the fence, eating hay and thinking deep donkey thoughts, such as, "Why does every idiot child think my back is a seat?" However, tonight was different. Maurice was no longer just Maurice. Thanks to an ambitious yet incredibly clueless zoo intern named Danny, he had been transformed into a zebra via a few buckets of white paint and what could only be described as artistic war crimes against nature. The paint job was atrocious. His stripes were crooked, his backside looked like a barcode drawn by a drunk toddler, and his tail had somehow been dipped in paint, giving him the tragic look of a half-melted ice cream cone. Danny had been very proud of his work. "Now people will actually pay attention to you, Maurice. No offense, but you were kind of a background character before." Maurice had promptly bitten Danny's sleeve and given him the longest, most judgmental glare in donkey history. Now, standing in his pen under the moonlight, Maurice pondered his future. Would he ever be taken seriously again? Would he ever escape this idiotic petting zoo? The answer arrived in the form of a spaceship. A very large, very glowing, and very idiot-filled spaceship. The craft hovered above the zoo, shimmering in the night sky with the kind of elegance that suggested its designers had read one too many sci-fi novels, but never actually tested if any of it worked. It emitted a soft, ominous hum, the kind of noise that normally precedes either a world-changing event or an incredibly stupid misunderstanding. Inside the ship, Captain Zagloff, the proud leader of the Zoglorfian First Contact Team, beamed with excitement. His gelatinous, pulsating body quivered with joy as he looked at the blurry Wikipedia screenshot-level research his team had compiled. "Behold, my fellow Zoglorfians," Zagloff announced, extending one of his many pulsating appendages toward the holographic image of a perfectly majestic, perfectly photoshopped zebra. "The supreme creature of Earth, the most noble and elusive being, the one they call Zebra." Bloopnar, the ship's chief scientist and certified overthinker, oozed nervously. "Captain, are we certain of this? I mean, this Earth data appears questionable. And the stripes, should they not be symmetrical?" "Nonsense, Bloopnar," Zagloff said, waving a tentacle dismissively. "Look at it. It has markings of great cosmic importance. The chosen patterns of the universe. We must retrieve this superior life form at once." Back on Earth, Maurice was seconds away from taking a nap when a blinding tractor beam zapped down from the sky, wrapping around his fake zebra body and yanking him upward with zero warning. Maurice's thoughts in order. What fresh hell is this? I have literally never asked for this. That is a big spaceship. If I survive this, I swear on all things holy, I will ruin someone's life. Within moments, Maurice found himself standing inside a sterile, glowing chamber, face to face with a group of giant, semi-transparent, glorified space jello creatures who were staring at him in awe. Zagloff dropped to the floor immediately, prostrating himself. "We are unworthy, O striped lord," Zagloff bellowed. "We have come to seek your wisdom." Maurice blinked. Twice. Slowly, the aliens stared at him expectantly. He glanced around the spaceship. There were glowing control panels, floating orbs of energy, and enough advanced technology to make NASA cry. He looked back at the aliens. They were hanging onto his every breath. Then he mentally processed the fact that they had just called him a lord. Slowly, very slowly, Maurice's brain did the only thing it could do. It connected the dots. These aliens, they were complete idiots. They thought he was some sort of cosmic genius. They had literally mistaken a grumpy donkey covered in dollar store paint for the wisest being on Earth. Maurice opened his mouth. There were 1,000 things he could say, 1,000 ways he could handle this, but he, a humble con artist of opportunity, chose chaos. He took a slow, exaggerated breath, then nodded sagely. "Yes," Maurice said, in his most authoritative, godlike voice. "You have done well, puny mortals." The aliens erupted in cheers. Bloopnar wept with joy. Zglorf was already taking notes. Maurice tilted his head up slightly in the universal gesture of pretentious superiority. "You may now present me with your greatest offerings," he said, pausing for dramatic effect, "which shall include unlimited hay and daily massages." The aliens fell over themselves to comply. And just like that, Maurice the donkey, professional, nap enthusiast and lifelong zoo prisoner, had just become the most powerful being in the galaxy. Maurice lounged on what could only be described as the greatest throne in donkey history. The Zoglofians had constructed it within minutes, a hovering, cushioned platform that gently vibrated at all times, perfectly calibrated for maximum donkey comfort. Before him, the entire crew of the spaceship knelt in absolute devotion. Some of them were oozing reverently. Others had begun a synchronized, gelatinous wobble, which Maurice assumed was some sort of sacred Zoglofian bow. Either way, he was mildly impressed and extremely entertained. Bloopnar approached with an ornate tray containing an assortment of finely chopped hay, a glowing cube of unknown cosmic energy, and what looked suspiciously like a very fancy pillow with his face embroidered onto it. "Oh, Supreme Striped One," Bloopnar said, voice quivering with emotion, "we have prepared the finest offerings in your honor. Please bless us with your celestial wisdom." Maurice chewed a mouthful of hay, thoughtfully smacking his lips, and exhaled. "First of all," he said, flicking an ear with maximum gravitas, "this is adequate hay. Not exceptional, but adequate. Improve it." Bloopnar immediately took notes. "Yes, of course, Exalted One. What adjustments should be made?" Maurice narrowed his eyes, as if contemplating some deep cosmic revelation. "More hay," he said. The aliens erupted into cheers. Zglorf clutched his head as if he had just been granted divine enlightenment. "Of course, it is so simple, yet so profound. More hay. Why have we never thought of this?" Maurice licked his lips smugly. These idiots had just given him a spaceship, a throne, and a personal hay delivery service. If he played his cards right, he could be crowned Emperor of the known universe by next week. "Now," Maurice continued, dramatically adjusting his posture on the throne, "I must educate you on the most important aspects of my sacred species." The aliens leaned in with desperate anticipation. Maurice smirked. "Time to have some fun." "Our kind," he began, "are the ancient rulers of Earth, the smartest, most revered beings in existence. We invented democracy, sarcasm, and, most importantly, the concept of naps." Zglorf let out a choked gasp. "Naps? A divine ritual?" Maurice nodded solemnly. "Indeed, a sacred practice of deep contemplation and spiritual renewal." He paused, letting his words sink in, then gave them the ultimate command. "I must have at least 5 naps per day, undisturbed, in order to maintain my vast and infinite wisdom." Zglorf immediately turned to his crew. "You heard him. Construct the nap chamber of infinite peace." Bloopnar was already sketching designs on a glowing pad. "Supreme One, do you prefer artificial gravity or full weightlessness during these naps?" Maurice pretended to think deeply. "A mix of both. Surprise me." The aliens bowed lower, clearly in awe. Maurice was about to request a personal team of hoof massagers when an alarm suddenly blared through the ship. The walls pulsed red, and a robotic voice echoed through the corridors. "Warning, warning. Unidentified life forms detected. Approaching. Earth. Classification. Hostile." Maurice stopped mid-chew. "Excuse me, what now?" Zglorf flailed several appendages in alarm. "Oh no, this could be the great galactic rivalry reignited, the return of the feared—" The screen flickered. Morris narrowed his eyes at the sight of the intruders. They were zebras, a whole herd of them, projected live onto the main viewing screen, standing in the middle of the African savannah, looking extremely pissed. At the front of the group was Reginald, the most majestic-looking zebra Morris had ever seen. He had perfectly symmetrical stripes, an intimidating glare, and a posture that screamed, "I attended an elite boarding school and will absolutely sue you." The ship's intercom crackled. "Attention, extraterrestrial life forms. This is Reginald of the Global Zebra Alliance. We demand an explanation for why you have abducted one of our kind. If this is an act of war, we are prepared to retaliate." Maurice choked on his hay. "Oh, for the love of..." Zglorf gasped. "An official diplomatic message. They know of your abduction, Supreme One. What are your divine orders?" Maurice quickly regained his composure. He could not, under any circumstances, allow the aliens to realize he was not actually a zebra. That would lead to questions. And questions led to problems. Maurice cleared his throat. Yes. Well, these are lesser members of our species, not as wise as I, of course, but still moderately intelligent." Reginald squinted. "Maurice?" Maurice winced. "I do not know this Maurice you speak of. I am the Supreme Striped Overlord." Reginald's ears flattened. "You lying sack of..." Zglorf interrupted. "O great Reginald of the Zebra Alliance, we greet you in peace. Please, let us communicate as allies." Maurice tried not to scream. Reginald tilted his head. "Allies? Then explain why you have taken Maurice, an elderly donkey, and called him your supreme ruler?" Maurice felt his entire scam teetering on the edge of disaster. Zglorf paused. "Wait, what is this word? Donkey?" Bloopnar tapped on his datapad, searching through Earth's database. "Scanning now. Strange. No results for donkey." Maurice perked up. Wait. The aliens didn't know what a donkey was. Their entire research was based on a handful of bad internet images. They had no actual clue what he was supposed to be. Maurice grinned internally. Time to double down. He dramatically gestured toward the screen. "You see? These poor, misguided creatures. Their limited intelligence prevents them from understanding their own kind." He sighed, shaking his head. "It is tragic, really." Reginald's jaw dropped. "You absolute son of a..." Maurice cut him off. "Silence, lesser one. I will handle this." He turned back to the Zoglofians. "These zebras clearly do not recognize my elevated form. My markings are proof of my superiority." Zglorf nodded vigorously. "Yes, the more unique the stripes, the greater the power." Bloopnar clapped excitedly. "A most glorious revelation." Reginald looked 1 second away from a stroke. Maurice smirked. "Now, let us discuss the proper way to honor your supreme overlord." The zebras erupted in outrage. The Zoglorfians began chanting Maurice's name, and Maurice, he just lay back on his floating throne, chewing his hay and basking in the sheer magnificent stupidity of it all. Maurice had officially ascended to untouchable levels of fraudulence. Somehow, he had not only convinced the most gullible aliens in the universe that he was a cosmic genius, but he had also successfully gaslit an entire species of actual zebras into questioning their own reality. It was, in a word, beautiful. Glorf and his crew were currently engaged in a vigorous discussion about how best to honor their divine guest. Ideas had ranged from building a monument made of laser-infused hay to naming a newly discovered planet Maurice Topia Prime. Maurice, lounging on his gloriously vibrating throne, allowed himself to bask in the glory of doing absolutely nothing, while being worshipped. Meanwhile, Reginald and his increasingly outraged army of actual zebras were still screaming through the intergalactic communication link. "Listen to me, you gooey morons!" Reginald bellowed, his stripes practically bristling with rage. "That is not a zebra. That is a donkey with a horrible paint job. I refuse to negotiate until you remove him from your stupid floating gelatin palace." Maurice, lazily chewing a mouthful of superior alien hay, sighed dramatically and turned to Zglorf. "Such hostility," Maurice murmured. "Truly it wounds me." Zglorf shuddered. "They clearly do not understand your ascended wisdom, Supreme One." Maurice nodded very gravely, then turned back to the screen. "My dear, what was your name again? Roger? Reggie?" Reginald ground his teeth. "Reginald." Maurice pretended to forget immediately. "Ah, yes, Ronald, I understand your confusion." He sighed deeply. "You see, it is not your fault. You are simply too primitive to comprehend my elevated form." Reginald threw his head back in frustration. "Oh, for the love of—" Maurice pressed on before he could finish. "You and your herd are, how do I put this gently, basic? Yes, your stripes are far too symmetrical, no variation, no uniqueness. Meanwhile, my divine asymmetry grants me infinite wisdom and power." Reginald sputtered. "You have crooked stripes because you were painted by a half-wit with no steady." And Maurice gasped theatrically. "How dare you speak to your overlord this way?" He shook his head in exaggerated disappointment. "Clearly you lack discipline. Perhaps it is time for a lesson." Zglorf perked up. "A lesson? In the ways of supreme zebra culture?" Maurice nodded solemnly. "Indeed. And what better way to demonstrate my supremacy than through a grand challenge?" The Zoglofians gasped in awe. Reginald narrowed his eyes. "I don't like where this is going." Maurice grinned. "A sacred rite, a test of greatness, a battle of true zebras." Blupnar vibrated with excitement. "Oh, exalted one, what form shall this challenge take?" Maurice leaned back, rubbing his hoof against his chin in mock thought. Then, with the gravitas of an ancient space philosopher, he declared, "A race." The room fell silent. Then the aliens burst into cheers. "A race! A test of speed and endurance. Of course." Reginald, still visible on the screen, looked like he was going to implode. "You want to race me? A real zebra? You're joking." Maurice gave him a slow, arrogant look. "I do not joke. I am supreme." Reginald snorted. "You have the running capabilities of a soggy couch." Maurice pretended to be deeply offended. "You dare insult the legendary agility of the Supreme Striped One." Zglorf immediately turned to his crew. "Prepare the Grand Galactic Racecourse. We shall witness history in the making." Maurice grinned internally. Did he have any chance whatsoever of outrunning an actual zebra? Absolutely not. But did that matter when you were a professional con artist? Also absolutely not. The Grand Galactic Racecourse was, to put it mildly, ridiculous. The Zoglofians had built a floating, looping track made of pure light, stretching across a zero-gravity environment with obstacles that looked like they had been stolen from an interdimensional game show. Maurice stood at the starting line, next to Reginald, who was still muttering curses under his breath. The entire spaceship had gathered around, cheering wildly, convinced that this was going to be the most sacred event in the history of the universe. Zglorf raised a glowing appendage. "Begin!" Reginald immediately shot forward, hooves pounding against the track, moving like a well-trained athlete. Maurice, meanwhile, barely took 2 steps before dramatically collapsing to the ground. "Oh, the agony!" Maurice wailed. "I have been betrayed." The crowd gasped in horror. Zglorf rushed to Maurice's side. "What has happened, Supreme One?" Maurice groaned theatrically. I was about to unleash my true divine speed, but alas, my ancient power has been sabotaged." Reginald, halfway around the track, skidded to a stop. "Oh, for what are you even talking about?" Maurice dramatically flopped onto his side. "It is clear. Reginald has conspired against me." Zglorf's gelatinous form quivered with rage. "Treachery? In the grand challenge?" Maurice let out a weak cough. He must have used inferior primitive magic to slow me down." "The Aliens began to murmur in outrage. Reginald screamed, "That makes no sense!" Maurice rolled onto his back for extra effect. "Alas, I grow weak." Bloopnar flung several tentacles in panic. "He's fading! We must revive him." Zglorf snapped into action. "Bring forth the sacred hay of restoration." Within seconds, a group of aliens rushed forward, dumping an entire banquet of golden sparkling hay directly into Maurice's mouth. Maurice chewed thoughtfully. That was some damn good hay. He sighed heavily, sitting back up. "It is a miracle. I live." The crowd cheered. Reginald looked like he was going to combust. "This is the most blatantly stupid thing I have ever witnessed." Zglorf raised a triumphant appendage. "The race is concluded. Due to the heinous sabotage of Reginald, the Supreme One is declared the winner." The aliens exploded into applause. Maurice casually resumed eating his hay. Reginald stood there, shaking with rage. "I swear to all that is holy, if I don't personally expose this scam, I will never show my face again." Maurice winked. "Better. Hurry then, because if Maurice had anything to say about it, his fraud empire was only just getting started." Reginald was done. He had reached a new level of rage, one previously unknown to Zebrakind. His stripes were practically vibrating with pure, unfiltered indignation. Across from him, Maurice, the lying, conniving, fraudulent donkey, sat in a golden hover throne, nibbling on a celestial-quality hay bouquet while being worshipped by an army of gelatinous space idiots. And to make things worse, Maurice had just been declared the fastest zebra in the galaxy. Reginald took a deep breath, attempting, very unsuccessfully, to suppress the overwhelming desire to commit interstellar violence. "You, listen to me, you striped imposter," Reginald hissed, stomping forward. "This farce ends now. I'm calling for a full, unrestricted scientific examination." Maurice, mid-chew, lazily flicked an ear. Reginald continued, undeterred. "I demand that these intergalactic buffoons perform a full genetic scan to prove, once and for all, that you are nothing but a pathetic knockoff bootleg excuse of a zebra." The gathered Zogglorfians gasped in shock. Maurice froze. "Oh, crap, a scan? An actual, real scan? That was not part of the plan." He had meticulously crafted this fraud empire on the basis that the Zogglorfians were dumb enough to believe anything he said. They had never questioned a single thing. But if they actually checked his DNA... Game over! For the first time in his entire glorious con, Maurice felt genuine concern. Zglorf, who had been busily taking sacred notes on the Great Hay betrayal, looked up eagerly. "A scientific test? A true analysis of the Supreme One's divine lineage?" Maurice held up a hoof. "Oh, well, you see, that would be..." Reginald cut him off, his eyes burning with fury. "Yes, a full examination immediately." Bloopnar wiggled excitedly. "Oh, what a wonderful idea. We shall confirm the Supreme One's cosmic heritage through our most advanced scientific methods." Maurice forced a smile. "You know, science is subjective." Bloopnar ignored him and quickly tapped at the glowing panel on his arm. The ship's AI immediately responded. "Initiating full genetic scan. Scanning Supreme Striped One now." Maurice had approximately 3 seconds before everything fell apart, so he did the only thing that made sense. He collapsed to the floor. "Oh, no!" Maurice moaned dramatically, clutching his stomach despite not actually having hands. "Oh no, the strain of this accusation, it is too much for my divine essence to bear." Zglorf gasped. "Supreme One, are you dying?" Maurice winced. Yes, I'm absolutely dying." Bloopnar froze in panic. Oh no, stop the scan, stop the scan!" The AI, confused by the sudden hysteria, halted the process. Maurice let out an exaggerated, suffering groan. "This treachery, this betrayal. I feel my divine essence draining away." The aliens screamed in horror. Glorf immediately turned on Reginald. You have cursed him with your doubt. Reginald took a step back, utterly dumbfounded. What? That's not— Are you serious? Maurice rolled onto his back for extra dramatic effect. Only one thing can save me now. Zglorf fell to his knees. Tell us, O Great One, we shall do anything. Maurice, fighting the overwhelming urge to laugh, let out a weak, barely audible whisper. More hay, Bloopnar screamed. Get him more hay! Immediately! Within seconds, a frantic army of Zglorfians scrambled in every direction, rushing to gather their finest, rarest, most sacred hay supplies. Maurice, still sprawled on the floor, grinned internally. These aliens were so stupid. However, Reginald wasn't giving up that easily. He turned, stomping toward the control panel, and shouted, Computer! Resume scan. The AI beeped in response. Resuming scan now. Maurice's heart plummeted. Oh, no, 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 Zglorf screamed. He's too weak. You'll kill him. I'll take that risk, Reginald snarled. Maurice, in full desperation, launched himself toward the nearest button and smashed it with his hoof. The ship immediately lurched. A deafening alarm blared through the ship. Emergency escape protocols activated. Commencing auto-ejection. Maurice blinked. Wait, what? Before he could react, a trapdoor opened beneath him, and he was instantly sucked into a glowing escape pod. Pooh, come on. And then, with a deafening whoosh, the pod shot out of the spaceship and went hurling toward Earth at breakneck speed. Maurice woke up face first in a pile of manure. It took him a solid minute to process his surroundings. He was back in the petting zoo, back in his filthy, run-down pen, back to being just Maurice the donkey, covered in peeling paint and smelling like intergalactic. Betrayal. A group of children stared at him through the fence. A little girl pointed. Mommy, why is the zebra so sad? Maurice lifted his head, still half buried in the dirt. I hate everything, he muttered. Then a shadow loomed over him. Maurice turned and immediately wished he hadn't. Reginald stood there looking. Smug as hell, told you it would all fall apart. Maurice let out a long, suffering groan. Reginald leaned in closer, lowering his voice. Oh, by the way, he whispered, I recorded everything. Maurice froze. What? Reginald grinned. Every single second, the lies, the race, the divine essence nonsense, all of it. Maurice felt genuine dread for the first time in his life. You wouldn't. Reginald pulled out a tiny alien recording device and waved it mockingly. Oh, I would. And guess what? This video is going intergalactic. Maurice stared at him in horror. You absolute monster, he whispered. Reginald smiled. See you on the news, Supreme One. And with that he trotted away, whistling cheerfully. Maurice buried his face back into the manure. This was going to be a long week.